Good evening, and welcome to the Fraser Performance Studio at GBH in Boston. I'm Anthony Rev'd, General Manager of GBH Music, and tonight we bring you an incredible event where we combine with our friends at the Boston Lyric Opera to bring you music that is new, interesting, innovative, and a great conversation to go with it. I want to thank donors from all over who support music and support the arts. It is part of humanity, and that's really wonderful to have that support. I also want to thank our Beacon Circle members for their support of what we do. And I'm going to begin with a very short, weird story. 3 years and 1 month ago to the day, I got a call in my office that morning. If you think back, it was March 12th, 2020. It was a Thursday. And the head of the Boston Lyric Opera called me and said, "We're doing a dress rehearsal of Norma tonight. They're going to close the theaters tomorrow, so we will never be able to do this production. Can you do anything to help us?" And we swung into motion, and that evening, Antonio, our brilliant engineer, recorded that rehearsal, that dress rehearsal. And then we shut down. And as people who create and want to connect with audiences, those months were torture for us. And that's what led to us going to this streaming concept where we used these studios, these facilities to connect with audiences. Tonight, 3 years and 1 month later, I feel like we've emerged into something new, a different world, a changed world. And yet, music is the constant, and it's so wonderful. And it's wonderful to have our friends from Boston Lyric Opera back with us in this studio. They've been here pre-pandemic many times, and now it's wonderful. So I'd like to bring up the head of Boston Lyric Opera, the general director and CEO, my good friend, and I say that honestly, Brad Vernatter.
Hello, thank you, Tony, and thank you, GBH, for your partnership on tonight's event. As you mentioned, Tony, mentioning Norma, it represents many years of partnership between our organizations, and that partnership in particular with Norma holds a special place for the reasons that you described, and the result was a recording that nourished us through the early days of being stuck at home. And it's meaningful for me in particular to be here tonight with you and with our artist for Omar, because somehow in my mind, Norma and Omar have become inextricably linked. Those rehearsals for Norma and the workshop presentation of Omar at the Opera America New Works Forum earlier in 2020 were the last pieces of live music that I heard, and so they left this imprint in my mind together that I'll carry with me forever. And it was at that Opera America workshop where I had the first opportunity to hear this music and knew that we had a chance to invest in a profound new work and to share that with our audiences here. So, like you said, Tony, to be here 3+ years later with the partnership with GBH, with our artists for Omar, and with all of you, it's meaningful. Tonight's event, Deconstructing Opera, is a long-standing program at Boston Lyric Opera that is an invitation to join the creative minds and the makers of this very ambitious art form. And we are so lucky and honored to be here tonight among some of the finest. I'm very honored and privileged to welcome to our event this evening Grammy Award-winning composer, musician, and our librettist and co-composer for Omar, Rhiannon Giddens. Yes. She'll be in conversation with Boston's renowned scholar and GBH podcast host, Emmett Price. And they'll be joined by our BLO artists who are performing in this presentation of Omar later this spring. You will hear tonight Sierra Bird, mezzo-soprano Sierra Bird, who is making her BLO debut in the role of Fatima, Omar's mother. And she's joined with two artists who have ties to the BLO Jane and Stephen Aiken Emerging Artists Initiative, which is an initiative that supports promising and up-and-coming emerging artists in our field. Brianna J. Robinson, who is one of our current emerging artists, who's performing many characters in the ensemble of Omar, and tonight you will hear her sing Julie's aria. And Brendan Shapiro, who is an emerging artist alum who's at the piano this evening. So I'm thrilled to be joined by everyone among our artists and with our partners at GBH and with all of you and our audience. So thank you for being here with us tonight.
So we're going to leave and turn it over to Emmett Price. And it just occurred to me that all the letters in Omar are also in Norma. Do with that what you will.
Oh my.
Emmett, it's all yours.
What a joy to see GBH and Boston Lyric Opera working together on this production. Let's give them another hand. Well, good evening to all of you who are in-house and those of you who are in the Digisphere. We are excited to be in this conversation. And I must tell you, if I can just take a moment and just geek out for a second. Because two-time Grammy Award winner, MacArthur genius, phenomenal composer, musician, tremendous human being, and one of probably the most smartest, profound, prolific, brilliant artists on the planet today. I get to sit next to her. Whoa. Okay, I'm done. Rhiannon, take us to 2020. Spoleto Festival. You get the call to commission a new work, a work that is inspired or will be inspired by an Arabic language autobiography of Omar ibn Said, who in 1807 was stolen from his homeland. A brilliant intellect who was well learned, a Muslim cleric who was stolen and transported, human trafficked, across the Atlantic Ocean to Charleston, South Carolina. And over all of the challenges that Omar experienced in 1831, he writes his own autobiography. And you use it as a muse for this work. Talk to us about the commissioning and what that was.
Yeah, I think it was 2018 or 17. I can't remember when we first, because it's been over 5 years. And I was performing at the Spoleto Festival, as I have done many times, and Nicole Taney and Nigel Redden, who were running the festival at that time, approached me and they said, "Have you ever heard of Omar bin Said?" And I was like, "Who?" Mm-hmm. And they told me about him, and I was just like, I don't know. I've ceased to be surprised at not knowing these things. I mean, I'm from North Carolina, born and raised in North Carolina, and didn't know anything about Omar, had never heard his name, which is, infuriating for so many reasons. But, so I kind of learned a little bit about him, and pretty rapidly on the heels of that, they, said, "Would you write an opera about him?" And it was the first opera that Spoleto has ever commissioned.
That's right.
And it was one of those, I'm kind of the say yes first and ask questions later. When it speaks to me, when it feels like, this is the right move, and a lot of times it's very instinctual, and I said yes, and and then quietly freaked out for a few weeks after that, like, how am I going to do this, But I've never regretted saying yes, because it's just been an absolute privilege to have any hand in representing Omar's story.
Yeah. Now, most of our folks know you through the work of the Carolina Chocolate Drops. I go back to the Sankofa Strings.
Deep cuts.
All right. All right. But most people, when they hear the music that you all produced and recorded with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and then they think about opera. Right? And so most folks don't know that you are a trained classical music, opera vocalist as well. And so I want to make sure we dispel some of the fictitious narratives that we have that are often stereotypes based on bias, right? We're in a season in this nation where certain histories and narratives are being banned, being erased, being removed from public spaces. How do you, as an artist, as a creative artist who has done a lot of work, I mean, back in North Carolina with the Moral Mondays, you participated there. How do you see this? How do you see this in this season? And what is our responsibility as creatives? And what do we charge and challenge our patrons to be responsible for as well?
It's the destructive thrashings of a dying snake, right? So when it gets to the end and it knows it's close, it goes nuts. That's what's happening. Because none of this is new, right? These stories we're just excavating, we're just uncovering, we're just talking about the true scope of what the United States was built on, and that is dangerous, right? Yeah. That is challenging, that is scary for people, because when you have received in a system that's inequitable, what does it mean when you start talking about how to make it equitable? Right? So some people are responding to that by going, yes, we need to know more. We need to make this fair. Some people are responding by going, we need to cover this up again. Yeah. And I say again, right? Because it's been mounds of dirt everywhere, covering this stuff up, erasing it, rewriting the narrative. I mean, people don't even know they're participating in the constant tellings of these false narratives. So I just think, when you look at the last 400 years, none of this is surprising. I'm like, look at the politics of the 1860s. I mean, it's crazy. You know what I mean? It's like, it really, the anomaly is you think about what happened after the Great Depression. You have that great sort of the creation of the social net, safety net. You have all of these things that were government funded and sort of went into the creation of so much infrastructure of our country. That was kind of the anomaly. When you think about it, and now that was all mantled, and now it's being dismantled slowly, right? That our educational system has been under threat since, at least the 70s. So it's like, but then what was happening before then? What was being taught before then wasn't, it was never perfect, and it was never telling the whole story. But, what we're seeing now is extremes. You're seeing this, right? Like, would have this happened 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, right? It's amazing. The support that Omar has gotten, the fact that it's happening, the fact that it had so many co-commissioners, the fact that it's coming together in this mind-blowing way, the fact that people from the mosque named after Omar bin Said came and loved it. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then you have Missouri defunding the library system. Right. Talk about extremes. So all we can do is to yell louder, but to do that effectively is to make art. Yes. That's who I can't remember who said that. That's the response, right? You make art bigger, better, whatever, more and more and more art in response to these threats to not only our democracy, but to our true nature. Yeah. Of what it means to be American, because when we look at these stories, they actually go into the beauty that has been wrested from the horror. Yeah. Yeah. And when you cover those stories, you conflate and destroy what's actually beautiful about America. Our economic might is not beautiful. It's not beautiful because it's been built on environmental destruction, genocide, slavery, all the horrible things. The music that we've created, the art that we've created, the communities that we've created, the culture, that's beautiful. That's right. And that's what's under threat. Because if we don't know that, then we listen to the false narrative just so we can keep fixing, building that widget.
In 2017, when the MacArthur folks selected you as one of the geniuses of our time.
They hate that term, by the way.
But what they said was that you had the ability to deal with the nuances, the complexities, and the interconnectedness across genres across various expressions, across histories, across peoples. And what you just said exemplifies just that. I mean, the way that you were able to synthesize, a response to a question by thinking about the humanistic aspect of it and what does it mean to be a human being, right? Regardless of our politics, regardless of our class or caste or however you want to deal with it, right? What does it mean to honor livelihood, right? And as our Rastafarian brothers and sisters would say, the notion of liberty, right? And this work actually speaks to that. Can you share just a little behind the scenes? Because we got some folks who I know will be here May 4th through 7, and we'll be seeing this work live. But can you give us just a little glimpse about how you weave through the complexities, the nuances, and the interconnectedness in this work?
Well, like my first, because I wrote the libretto, so I had to create the story. A lot of people are surprised at how slim his autobiography is. It's very short.
Yeah.
He's using 20 years after he's landed in America and he's no longer surrounded by his intellectual community. He's having to use a language that he learned to read the Quran. He didn't learn Arabic to write essays about his life, right? He learned it to read the Quran, and he would have spoken probably 3 or 4 other languages, like, from birth as his mother tongues, right? So he's using this language to tell a version of his story, knowing that he is in captivity and that he is being watched and that he is being read, with that eye. So there's a lot of layers that are happening here. And so what I had to do is to figure out what's the story. Every dramatic story has to have a conflict and a resolution. Well, it doesn't have to, but most of the stories that we tell, have an arc. What is the arc of Omar? And as I was reading this slim document, it quickly became apparent to me that the actual physical journey of his body, of being captured, taken on the Middle Passage, brought to South Carolina, escaping from South Carolina, recaptured in North Carolina, and then living out the rest of his days as an enslaved individual, was not the story. That was the framework for the real story. The real story to me became, how does he maintain his relationship with his God and his identity as a Muslim through all of that? Because people, some people will say, oh, well, clearly he converted. And I'm like, I don't know what y'all read. But this man quotes the Quran until he dies.
That's right.
Until he dies at the age of, 80, whatever he was up there, He lived longer in the States than he did in Senegal. And he was captured at 37. So for me, that was the story. And then also, what is the world he is coming into? And the idea of him not being a blank slate, nobody was a blank slate that was brought to any shore, whether we're talking the Caribbean, South America, North America. Nobody was a blank slate. People are bringing over whole lives and histories and generations of knowledge, of understanding, of cultural communication. And so that was, for me, really the most important thing, was listening to his words, the quotations that he chose, and letting them guide me, whether it was Quran or he also knew biblical quotes
correct.
as well. Letting that guide me, and then letting the knowledge that I have about the world that he landed in fill in, the rest of that. There's also an opportunity of making that enslaved world multidimensional. When we see these movies, I don't watch the movies because I've read the books. And I've read the history. I don't watch the movies. I don't watch 12 Years a Slave because I read the book. I was like, I don't need to see this. I'm glad it's out there. But when you see these movies, the violence is center stage.
That's right.
Right? The violence is center stage. And I was more interested in what are the cultural things around him? What are the different ways that people snatched joy out of this life, snatched a way of living that was going to honor their humanity. It's to make them human.
That's right.
Right? Because when you erase all that history, it's easier to dehumanize, because then you can make them do what you want them to do, and it doesn't affect you as much. So that's the way our history is taught. They're slaves. How many books have I seen? Slaves were brought over from Africa. People were brought from Africa, and then they were enslaved. There is action in that, because if there is somebody who is enslaved, There was somebody who enslaved them.
That's right.
Right? They didn't enslave themselves. So it's inherent in that there is two people. When you have a slave, that's somebody was born a slave, and that's just their natural. Even in our language, language is important.
Very important.
You know, so just thinking about all of that and bringing, you know, all those bits and pieces that I've been, you know, thinking about to bear.
Wow, wow. Y'all ready for some live music?
I don't know if they are they?
Yeah, that was kind of tepid.
No.
Yeah.
I was like,
Let
should
me
should
run the
give
cue
her?
again.
Yeah, I think so. Mhm.
Are y'all ready for some live music?
There we go.
Okay. Rhiannon, tell us about My Son, Omar. Tell us about this piece.
So this is, look, my history is when I started delving into the story of enslaved people, it was focused on women, and it still is. So I managed to sneak a couple of very strong women into Omar. Not even sneak. Julie just walked on the stage. She was just like, hello, I'm here. I was like, all right. But Omar's mother very quickly became a very important character, and someone, even after her death, who makes her presence very much known. She is killed in Act 1 at the end of the first scene, and she stays with him, you know, and she comes out during certain periods where he's like really wrestling with what is happening to him. He's questioning his God. He's going, why did you bring me here? What is going on? And she comes out and she represents so much. She represents those ties to home, the ties to his religion, ties to his faith. And in this scene, he has been sold to a pretty terrible man, owner, enslaver, and he is asleep. And she comes to him in his sleep, and she's singing to him, and she's comforting him in his sleep.
Tonight, performing My Son, Omar is mezzo-soprano Sierra Bird, who plays Omar's mother, Fatima, and accompanying her is Brendan Shapiro on piano.
My son, my son. My son, no matter what they say, I am with you. No matter where you go, I am with you. No matter what they do, I am with you. A part of you, a heart of you, my son. not despair. Never forget, remember it all. Never forget, remember the fall. You're not done yet. The light in the distance is a candle or a sun. It doesn't matter what it is, both are the one. Both are the one. Only the one can see the crook in the bend. It's a turn to us, but it's straight to him. It's a turn to us, but it's straight to him. It's a turn to us, but it's straight to him.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Sierra and Brendan. Rhiannon, the sound. I hear this sound, and as a composer, librettist, as a musician, a creative, sound is very important to us. And there's a timbre there, there's a tonality there, and it will be too easy to suggest that it sounds Arabic, or it sounds Muslim, or it sounds from, a part of the world. How did you conceptually manifest the sound that you felt as you were inspired by the work?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. It's exactly, you don't want to, there's a particular kind of specificity that I wanted to think about, and that was focused on his words and the Quran and really thinking about that. And then the other realm is it is creating a sound world where, you don't want it to be like, I'm not trying to sound like it's Senegalese music because that's not what I do, And I had to struggle with that because I was like, I kept coming back to like, why am I doing this? I'm doing this. I have a particular sound to what I do, and just let that be, But I've also I did listen to a lot of Senegalese Sufi music, and I've learned a lot about Middle Eastern and North African and Mediterranean music through my partner Francesco Teresi, and so there were a couple of like concrete things, like when it was the mother's music or Omar's music, it generally it was like modal. And a lot of times I had ostinatos that I was creating for my banjo, or the different various sort of string instruments I would have to hand. And so you create something that's kind of going over and over again, and then you create a melody over that, which is a more melodic rather than a chordal idea. And then, because there's like a moment where with Omar and his enslaver, and Omar is like singing in that way, and then it comes to his enslaver's words, and they're in more of a Western sort of, so that was a very deliberate, idea, but then within that, there's a lot of, it's not super specific within that, but and then it's time to mention my co-composer, Michael Abels, who caught all of that and added more to it, it's like, he immediately understood where I was coming from, and the two of us really found this incredible synthesis of walking between those worlds, and then the way that it was orchestrated and the way that he sort of I wish you could hear the strings that are being represented by that beautiful playing that he was doing there in those motives. So there was thought put into that, like when I did the Auctioneers, aria song, horrible thing. I listened to a lot of minstrel music, and we're like, what are the chordal structures that are going on here? It goes from here to here, and let me just see if I can use that as a limitation to then, start that. So those kind of ideas, like listening and creating a sound world, and then kind of composing from that without trying to be too, like trying to be at all like this is a representative thing of this place,
From the sound to the spirit. Last week was a very interesting week for those of us who pay attention to the intersections of spiritual journeys. So last week we had Ramadan, we had Passover, and we had the Protestant Holy Week, Good Friday leading to Easter. And one would think that in a week that has these intersections and these moments of coming together, that we as human beings might actually come together, right? And so this work has a lot of that. It has a lot of these moments spiritually. Can you talk about how you process that in the creation of the libretto?
Spiritually, that's really the answer. I really had to be open and let things flow through me, because I am a very spiritual person, and I've thought about some of these things a lot. I didn't know the Quran. I had to read it, because I was sitting here going, why me? And then I was like, well, maybe actually my new approach to these words is actually a good thing, because then I engage with them as the words that they are. And I didn't look at doctrine around it. I stayed away from all that, because I just focused on what Omar did, which is quote the Quran. And I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I thought about it, and I thought about the similarities and the differences, to Christianity. And I thought about, there's a part in Omar's aria, Psalm 23, in the second act, where he says, he's like, Christ is a mighty prophet, just not mine. It's like there's this acknowledgement that there's nothing wrong with believing other things. It's just like, don't put it on me, because that's not my belief. And so there is this idea that these religions and these spiritual beliefs and all sorts of different meanings. Because when you look at all the amounts of Muslim people who were brought over,
That's correct.
To the north, which was a lot more than people think.
That's correct.
From 1/5 to 1/4, right? Is some of the guesstimates, and you think about that community fragmenting, as it's not being reinforced, or it's surrounded by hostility or whatever, and people holding on to bits and pieces of that culture in any way that they can, and how it becomes then a part of a larger culture and doesn't disappear, but gets renamed or gets forgotten that that's where it came from, And so all of these things, and there's also this idea that in those parts of West Africa, there's not so much delineation. Right? And religions have more of an ability to coexist and to be together. There's even in the opera, there's a mention of Yemoya, and the Rishas and, indigenous African religions. And so it's letting all of that be, and letting it happen as it wanted to happen. There were times where things just kind of came out my pen. And I just went, look, I don't really want to claim credit for that. Somebody's got to put their name on it, so I guess I will. But I really felt that there was a lot of things working through me in the creation of that.
As we think about narratives, and we talked about, dispelling fictitious narratives that are based on bias and based on stereotypes, you alluded to a truth. That many of those human beings who were stolen from their indigenous homelands were not only practitioners of Islam, in whether 1/4 to 1/5, numerous were already practitioners of Christianity as well. But the point that I want to make is that many of them were brilliant intellects. They were literate. They were multilingual. they were cultured. Because I think that the way that history is taught in this nation is not only to dehumanize quote unquote Africans, but to also to wipe out the reality that they had brilliance, or what I like to call Black excellence. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that in your research, and also how you brought that to light through this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going back to this idea of blank slates, nobody was a blank slate. And in fact, people don't understand that this country, people went over to different parts of Africa precisely for their skills.
Yeah.
Right? Rice growers, cattlemen.
Yeah.
Where does cowboy come from? It's a long story, but it starts in Africa. Mm-hmm. People's indigo dyeing, right? People went and they knew what parts of Africa they were going to go to and bring people. So there was a knowledge of the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then it's important also, people were literate. People were literate in different languages, not just Arabic, the people were literate in different languages. And there was also an oral tradition that was incredibly complicated and complex. Literacy is not the only way to transmit information. You had jellies, who colonizers called griots, with generations of knowledge in their heads. That's sophistication. That is, incredible intelligence. And so you have all of this, coming over in these people. And it's like the thing that Omar was able to do is just unbelievable. The fact that he was able to hold on to that language. People have read it and they're like, yeah, there's mistakes, whatever, but it is legible. It is and this is years and years and years. I'm just thinking about being in a hostile environment, a violent, hostile, traumatic environment for decades, and holding on to and holding on to this language. It's just astonishing. And so that is I think an important part of this. And that was one of the moments I wanted to, there's this moment where the bad master, and there's a bad master and a good master, and they're played by the same baritone on purpose, right? But at the end of Act One, he's been really crude, and he's just like, rawr, and meanwhile Omar's singing this beautiful, Quranic verse, and I really wanted to highlight that there's all of these different ways of expressing that and trying to point that out, in a way that's not, that works. I mean, you can't do everything with one thing. I sure tried though. I'm putting it all in because I don't know if I'm ever going to get another chance. So, I have footnotes in my libretto, So it's just you do what you can. But this is also the world that he came into. It was chaotic.
Yeah.
It was chaotic. There's all of these things happening all at once, and I wanted to also represent that for him.
Yeah. Tell us about My Daddy Wore a Cap Like Yours.
So this is thinking about that wider Muslim community, people holding on to whatever pieces they can. And so in Act One, when Omar is in the auction with all of the other enslaved people who are going to be bought and sold, he meets a character named Julie. And they're having this interaction. Omar doesn't understand English. He's just like, what's going on? And he finally gives, he says this blessing in Arabic, and she recognizes it. And then she says to him, come up to us, Fayetteville, Master John Owens, come up to us, Fayetteville. And so that was the Deus ex machina to get him up to Fayetteville, right? And then he distracts the folks, and she runs off, and then but there's this moment with his hat. He has a cap, which is part of the identity, part of his Muslim identity, and he's painted, and all of the paintings of him, he has his cap on. And other Muslim enslaved people also, there's paintings of them, and they all have the cap on, right? So there's this idea, and the auctioneer takes it off his head and throws away his identity, right? And she picks it up. And then she runs off. Later in the opera, he makes it to Fayetteville, and they meet again. And he says, at this point, he knows English. He says, I want to know why me? Why did you want to help me? And then she says, my daddy wore a cap like yours.
Wow. Let's invite Brianna J. Robinson, accompanied by Brendan Shapiro.
like yours. He got down on his knees and he faced the rising sun, and he did it again when the day was done. And he would need this, and he would need that, no matter the need, no matter the fact. He drove my mama crazy, but she loved him anyway. They found each other in the darkness. The way they looked at the world wasn't the same, but the way that they looked at each other, there was the flame. They sewed my daddy down when I was 10. I've never gone as fast as I did then. The last look in his eyes was for me and her. I'll never forget the family we were. No matter what they say, our tears get red, just like theirs. No matter what they say, our tears get shed, just like theirs. Some men, they came a-courting after that, but they ate all the lean, they ate all the fat. They drove my mama crazy, and she sent them all away. We
remember it all, what else do we have? Talk to us about that line.
Well, it's like, what else we got, you know? There was so much taken from people that this creation of a new culture, you know, this maintaining of a sense of humanity in the midst of inhumanity, you know, we need to know our history. And so it's tied to the very end of the opera, where she and Omar's mother sing, "Tell Your Story, Omar." They're convincing him to write his story. She says, "Tell your story, Omar, you must, or no one will ever know and we will fade into dust." She's saying you have the power in your pen to make us all live again.
Wow.
And these are it's not just about Omar, of course, you know? It's also about how do we remember our history in a way that is not, you know, because the way that African American history has historically been taught, you know, I'm thinking about my upbringing, you know, in school, has been one of degradation, violence. I was taught, oh, you know, slavery wasn't even that efficient of a system and it was dying out anyway. We weren't even good slaves, right? That's what I was taught. And then you think about the actual economic engine that slavery was, and the fact that we were able to create and to survive and to thrive and to, you know, and to, in the face of multiple, not just us, this has happened to
Yes.
everybody
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or
That's
form
right.
who was not in the ruling class.
That's right.
Because we talk about class, we talk about caste, we talk about who was not considered white when they came over here, wasn't just us, right? So all of this is, you know, kind of interacting, and this idea of joy, you know, this idea of how do we talk about the strength that we were able to bring to bear on this, and what humans are able to do. It is not unique to us, right? It's just our story is a unique one in terms of the way that our culture came together is unique.
That's right.
Because every other group that came to the United States had a reference point.
That's right.
You know, a continent is not a reference point. You know? So there are things we can think about Pan-African, and we can think about things that inform us as our culture, but we had to create something new. You know? I went to Africa. I ain't African. You know? Like, I recognize some things, but I'm like, oh. You know? And not even just because I'm mixed, but also just our culture is African American.
That's right.
That hyphen is very important. So it's just thinking about all of those things, and how do we tell our story in a way that acknowledges the bad stuff, but also acknowledges all of the beauty. You know?
There's a piece of the our story that is our story. And I want to go back to the responsibility of the audience. And perhaps we can think about this through the lens of deconstructing opera. What is the responsibility of the audience in this specific work, right? Because we've had a very loaded conversation about some heavy topics and some themes. And is it the responsibility of the audience to be curious, to be inquisitive, and to go ye therefore and seek out additional information and expand your knowledge base, or to unlearn what may have been the systemic learning over one's life? What is that challenge to this audience from May 4th to May 7th, by the way? What is the challenge?
I think the challenge is always to come in with an open mind and to go out with an open heart. I think that's always the challenge. Put yourself into this character's shoes. Imagine, my son is 10 years old. Imagine being sold away from him at this point in his life. Wow. What does that mean? What does it mean to people that's happening to today? People being trafficked all over the world. So it's like, don't look at it as a relic. Don't look at it as something that is past. Look at it as something that is telling us about ourselves and of our future if we don't do the things that we need to do. So that's all, And if people want to go read, go read. If people don't want to go read but are walking around with a slightly more, rounded feeling about, what took place in our history, I feel like my job is done. But I can't have a particular thing in mind for people. I think the main thing is to acknowledge that different people are going to be affected by this piece in different ways. And if you are sitting next to somebody at the end of Act One who is very struck by what just happened, and you feel different about it, you thought it was great, but you're processing it differently, just be aware of it. You know what I mean? I think that's an important thing, because we're now seeing operas that are culturally deep for this place, not for Italy or France or England or whatever, but for this place. And we've had a few of those, but we're really seeing, this Omar is not unique in the opera form either.
Right.
We're seeing things like Fire Shut Up in My Bones. We're seeing all of these different stories that have very deep social and cultural relevance for this place. And so I just think that is really important, is to recognize that it might hit you different than it hits somebody else in the audience. And that's okay, but be gentle and be aware.
What are you most proud of about this work?
I'm just, I just want to say that I feel so lucky and so blessed in my collaborators. First, in my collaborator, Michael Abels, who I cold emailed and said, hey, you don't know me, but do you want to write an opera together? And he was like, I've always wanted to write an opera. And we were off to the races. He's a remarkable composer in all of his own projects, film composer, classical composer, just nicest guy in showbiz, and I'm not exaggerating. And we had this incredible rapport and working relationship that I treasure. Also, when you think of Kineza Shaw and her entire team, because opera is an incredibly complex and amazing art form that, by the way, Black people have been participating in for centuries.
A long time. That's
long,
right.
long, long time. This is not new. This is not how you get, this is like, we just we're just uncovering the history. But, and that her team has just brought this to life in such an amazing way. The visuals, the attention to detail, how she's reacting to the story and bringing up these ideas. And then all of our commissioning partners who have just, been open the doors to us as we've come from place to place. So I that's what I'm the most proudest about, is being part of this beautiful team that is focused on Omar, Julie, Fatima, the people on stage, and then all of the singers and the musicians who are bringing this to life. And there's so much love in all of the cast so far, and I'm already seeing in this one, these people are feeling it and they are just wanting to serve the music. And I just feel blessed to be part of such an incredible group of people.
Well, you speak about how lucky you are and how blessed you are. We are lucky and blessed to have you. Yeah. We joked back in the green room as I, shared that Rhiannon received an honorary doctorate degree in 2020 from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Dr. Giddens, you have rocked us tonight. You have, I think, inspired, encouraged, challenged, perhaps even convicted us to be better human beings. And I think in the world that we live in on this here day, we need that. I think that art does that. I think that creatives do that. But you have exemplified what it means to allow yourself to be honest, transparent, humble, but also courageous to challenge us to be similarly yoked. So I appreciate that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this creative work. Sierra Bird and Brianna J. Robinson and Brendan Shapiro, thank you so much. And thank you to the phenomenal audience, both here and online. Thank you.
Beautiful. I'm now the most hated person in the room because I said it's time, we need to wrap up. But first of all, I want to thank you both. I made a comment earlier about how during the pandemic, it was the connection to music and humanity that kind of kept us all going. And I always think one of the things growing up in the musical world that always struck me is you study history, and in the history books, they mention the people who start the wars. But we all enjoy the output of those who were creators, not destroyers. And we are all about creating, and it's beautiful, and I can't wait to see the piece. So thank you. I want to thank all of our friends at Boston Lyric Opera. It's so wonderful to have you back with us here in our studio. I want to thank all of you who support what we do and what Boston Lyric Opera does, or your local opera company if you're watching elsewhere. And I just want to say from GBH Music, it is such a pleasure to be able to bring you this kind of content because this is what it's about. So thank you and good night.